Hello, hello, hello. You know, I've taken on a newfound language called baby babble. Learn a little bit of that. Anyways, happy Tuesday. Hitting the 5 o'clock rush hour. Hope everybody's doing good. Instagram fired up. All right, good evening, friends, colleagues, and fellow explorers of health and wellness. I'm Dr. Joaquin Acosta, your guide in the enlightening journey of Know Your Pharmacist. Today, as we stream across multiple platforms, from the vibrant energies of YouTube and Facebook to the professional networks of LinkedIn and the lively interactions on Twitch and X, we're set to dive into an extraordinary episode. As we stand at the crossroads of history and innovation, this evening's stream, proudly brought to you by the dedicated teams at Pharmtrue, Horse Cannabis Co, Vado Speedway Park, and the Break Chicken Farm, is not just a dialogue, but a celebration. Celebration of the indomitable spirit and the enduring contributions of women in the realms of pharmacy and cannabis research. We'll embark on a journey through time, tracing the steps of Elizabeth Gooking Greenleaf, a pioneering spirit in pharmacy, and segue into the inspiring advancements made by women in the field of medicine and cannabis. This isn't just a recollection of past glories. It's a beacon guiding us towards a future where health and wellness are not just goals, but realities shaped by knowledge, innovation, and compassion. We'll delve into the intricate world of herbal wellness, understanding how ancient wisdom and modern science intertwine, creating pathways to better health. But that's not all. We'll also spotlight our community's efforts in health education, share insights on men's health in the modern world, and much more. Your participation, your insights, and your stories are the heartbeats of this live stream, so I invite you to join in, comment, question, and engage as we unravel these fascinating topics together. We're not just viewers or listeners, we're active participants in a movement towards a healthier, more informed society. And let's empower each other with knowledge, inspire with groundbreaking stories, and infuse our evening with the joy of discovery. So sit back or lean in, and let's get this enlightening journey underway. Welcome to Know Your Pharmacist, where every story we share, every insight we gain brings us closer to the pinnacle of human health and understanding. So guys, Women's History Month is all of March. You know, we had International Women's Day that we just passed, but you know, in honor of Women's History Month, definitely want to spend some time on some of these live streams, really honoring women and exploring a little bit, you know, just about, you know, how fascinating women have been in terms of, you know, the careers that I'm a part of. I can definitely speak to those at the very least. And that's pharmacy and cannabis, guys. And so we're going to be talking about that today. And, you know, there's some pretty cool stuff that I want to share with you, starting off with, you know, the mother of it all, right? Miss Greenleaf, first woman pharmacist ever. How cool is that? So, you know, showing you guys about Elizabeth Gooking Greenleaf here. I'm pulling up her picture for you guys, so we get that commemorated properly. Excellent. Thank you, Pacifica Compounding Pharmacy, for the nice image and graphic there. So let's talk about a little bit about Elizabeth Gooking Greenleaf and what makes her such a badass, right? So Elizabeth Gooking Greenleaf, she's recognized as the first female pharmacist in the United States of America. Not only was she a mother to 12 children, impressive, she's considered the mother of pharmacy as well. Her trailblazing impact set the stage of success for female pharmacists today. So Elizabeth was the wife of Harvard-educated physician Daniel Greenleaf and began her pharmaceutical career by assisting her husband in preparing medications for his patients. In 1727, she courageously left their hometown and moved to Boston to open her own apothecary shop. Her husband soon followed, and they spent their lives running the pharmacy together, and she was the only female among 32 New England apothecaries in the 1700s. That's pretty crazy, right? She died in 1762, but her legacy lived on and showed women across the country that a career in pharmacy is possible. And in 2012, the American Pharmacist Association featured her as one of 17 exceptional female pharmacists deemed responsible for the advancement of women in pharmacy. Her bravery and entrepreneurship, according to Digital Pharmacist, has inspired women to join the profession of pharmacy. And today, women are working in a pharmacy-related career more than their male counterparts. In fact, 59.9% today of pharmacists are actually women. And furthermore, there are more women in managerial positions in pharmacy than ever before. So since the founding of the American Pharmacist Association in the mid-1800s, there have been 7 women who have served as president, exemplifying the fact that pharmacy is one of the most egalitarian professions in America today. So, shout out to pharmacy. I can greatly remember in pharmacy school that, men, we were actually the minority in class, which was pretty cool, right? I mean, typically, in a lot of settings, we are not quite the minority. And so, interesting enough, I've got some other statistics for women in pharmacy. So in 2020, 57.8% of practicing pharmacists in the United States were women, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, which was a 14% increase from pharmacists who were female in the mid-20th century. So there was a lot of work done by a lot of pioneers in pharmacy that were women along that time. And I know we started with Miss Greenleaf, but for all of the women along the way that we are leaving out, it is by no intention by any means, just to try to make sure that we are able to get through the show in time, because there's been a lot of women that have done a really good job in advancing the profession. So I'm going to share with you guys a little bit more from the Pharmacy Times. And this was commemorating Women's Pharmacist Day, correct? October 12th, but right, this is what I'm talking about today, Women's History Month, and that's all the month of March, guys. And so we want to definitely spend some of that time in really dedicating and understanding a little bit more as females and their participation in the pharmacy profession, right? So pretty interesting. Obviously, pharmacy has really created a great opportunity for women, not only as pharmacists, but as pharmacy technicians too. So here's some stats about pharmacy technicians in the United States that are pretty cool. In 2021, 78.8% of pharmacy techs were women and 21.2% were men. And in 2023, 77% of pharmacy technicians were female and 23% are male. The average age of a female pharmacy technician, is 37.1. Right, while the average age of a male is 34.5. So very, very interesting stuff there in both sides of the profession. But, Elizabeth Gooking Greenleaf, she really was the first female pharmacist in the United States, had 12 children, worked and raised that entire apothecary with her husband, Dr. Greenleaf, and it's really awesome there. So, looking down at it, a lot of the other pioneering female pharmacists up through the 20th century may be technically considered hidden women, according to Pharmacy Times, and that although they were successful in pharmacy practice, while many owning or operating pharmacies and participating in pharmacy advocacy and organizations, the lack of publicly regarding their activities is lost in historical record. Although many colonial women practiced what was called family psychic, or the preparation of herbals and natural medicines, which we'll talk about a little bit too in our Enlightenment Hour, there's little record of practicing female pharmacists prior to 1776. Greenleaf is one of the only women of colonial times for whom a written record of her practice exists. Still, despite being on a list of apothecaries in colonial New England and being known for helping to run a Boston apothecary shop with her husband, there's nothing to indicate that Greenleaf ever received the same education and training as her contemporaries. Interesting enough, right? Whereas pharmacy students today are majority female, Greenleaf's lack of formal training is unsurprising for her time. Until the latter part of the 19th century, pharmacy education was administered under the apprentice system. Between the colonial period of 1804, only 4 women are known to have received the training necessary to practice pharmacy commercially. The prominent of those was Elizabeth Marshall, the granddaughter of the famed Christopher Marshall, who owned Marshall Apothecary in Philadelphia and was a renowned owner as a pioneer in pharmacy education. Once prominent, Marshall Apothecary declined into financial difficulty before Elizabeth took over and restored the business. It wasn't until 1863 that Mary Jacobi became the first female to receive a pharmacy degree from the New York College of Pharmacy. The transition to college or university-based education helped facilitate women education, as most programs were institutions that could facilitate the coeducation of women. This may not have been as much of a progressive stance as one of the financial need and opportunity, because schools depended on student fees to function, and there was not fee discrepancies among the genders. Surprise. As many as 1,500 women are estimated to have attended a U.S. pharmacy school between the time Jacobi graduated and the year 1900. By the end of World War II, the number of women enrolled annually had increased to more than 2,300. Although most faculty members remained male, there were a few notable female pioneers who left legacies still impacting pharmacy education today. The first documented female faculty member was Josephine R. Barbat, who taught at the California College of Pharmacy starting in 1889. Unfortunately, very little is known of Barbat's influence. One of the most notable of her time, Zeta Mary Cooper, served on the faculty of the University of Iowa from 1887 until 1942. And she was known for her dedication to pharmacy advocacy and service. She founded several pharmacy groups and organizations, including Rho Chi, Kappa Epsilon, and the women's section of the American Pharmaceutical Association. In fact, the advocacy of women such as Cooper resulted in female membership and leadership in professional pharmacy organizations decades earlier than occurred in medicine. Despite inroads made by women in the profession, they did not have an easy pursuit. So, in 1901, a pharmacy journal published an article saying that they did not believe pharmacy is a profession that women will universally aspire to, nor one that they are universally fitted to fill properly. Boy, did that age nicely, right? The author's opinion, thankfully, was not shared by many pharmacy deans at the time, many of whom are known to have gone on the record with their positive opinion of women in the profession. 11 years after the article's appearance, Cooper wrote her own article in the same journal, countering that if there was a place for a women's peculiar talents in other lines of human endeavor, why is there not work in pharmacy to which she is especially suited? The tenacity of Cooper and her contemporaries ensured women not only continued to be educated as pharmacists, but were increasingly integrated into the profession. Without them, the abundant growth, prominence, and influence and contributions of women to the profession would have never occurred. Chills, right? Unfortunately, most of what is recorded of women pharmacists is limited to features such as school attendance, state of license and or practice, and service to a pharmacy organization. However, there are a few pioneers whose actions and impacts are better documented than others. In 1893, the Women's Pharmaceutical Association of Illinois was formed to accommodate women who would be attending the Columbian Exposition of 1893 held in Chicago. This group, led by Jean Gordon and May Reynolds, ran a model pharmacy that provided medications to visitors at the World Fair and won a coveted award by fair leaders. Pretty cool, right? The group disbanded shortly afterwards, but their temporary existence lasted long enough to show not just Americans, but visitors from around the world exactly how competent a female pharmacist can be. So although it's not known exactly if Anna Louise James was the first African-American female pharmacist, she was one of the first to graduate from pharmacy school and become licensed in Connecticut. When her brother-in-law left to serve in World War I in 1917, Anna took over operations and ran the pharmacy for the next 50 years. She's well remembered by those in her community for her dedication and care. She also served as a muse for Anna's niece, Ann Petrie, a fellow pharmacist and one of the first best-selling African-American female writers who immortalized the pharmacy in her writings. Almost 7 decades after Anna's entry into pharmacy, Mary Munson Runge was elected the first African-American president of the American Pharmacists Association. Hospital pharmacy grew under the influence of several women, including two nuns. Sister Mary John Gearman was a charter member of the American Society of Hospital Pharmacists, otherwise known as ASHP, and served as treasurer from 1943 to 1946. 3 decades later, Sister Mary Gonzalez Duffy became the organization's first female president. Gloria Niemaker Frank, who also served as the first female ASHP secretary, was the first woman to receive the Remington Medal of Honor in 1987 and the first female to have a major award from a national pharmacy organization in the United States named for her, the APHA Gloria Niemaker Franke Mentor Award. The practice of pharmacy that modern women in pharmacy know is almost unrecognizable from that of our forebears. Women are not only members of the profession, but leaders, innovators, and mentors. It would not be too presumptuous to assume that those early pioneers would be proud of the role women in pharmacy have played in the past century and those substantial contributions that female pharmacists make every day. One thing we do not have in common with many of the early female pharmacists is that most of us will not be recorded in the history books. However, women's dedication to the profession and to patient care will ensure that each woman leaves behind a legacy that will not be forgotten as long as we pass down the standard to future generations of women in pharmacy. And, overall, super cool stories, plenty of women pharmacists that contributed and women in medicine that weren't even listed there. But I think, that's a really cool nutshell of really looking at some significant American history and looking at, females in the profession. So let's move on over to our Tech Talk segment where we're going to break down some cool stuff by the National Women's Hall of Fame, highlighting inventions and discoveries of women in medicine. Coming on down. So let's start here. Biologist and cytogenicist Natty Stevens discovered that X and Y chromosomes were responsible for sex determination. Pretty cool. Other ones, pathologist Maud Sly, right here, believed in the hereditary transmission of cancer before it was scientifically accepted. She's credited with developing genetically uniform mice to aid in research. Pretty insane. Other things, microbiologist and physician Gladys Dick co-discovered the microbe that causes scarlet fever and co-patented the Dick test to determine an individual's susceptibility to the disease. Pretty great. Microbiologist Alice Evans discovered that bacterium responsible for undulant fever. This led to the pasteurization of milk. I don't know where we'd be if any of these things weren't discovered, right? Elizabeth Lee Hazen and Rachel Fuller Brown developed the first antifungal antibiotic, which they named nystatin. All proceeds were invested in the Research Corporation to fund medical research. How cool is that? Nystatin, a very common antifungal that's absolutely critical in plenty of different healthcare settings today. And what did she do with the proceeds? She invested them all in a research corporation. That's insane. When you think of the greed in pharma nowadays, for actual good medicine that's developed, this is good medicine, right? And it has proved to be over time. It's awesome. Anyways, let's keep moving on. Physician and pathologist Louise Pierce conducted research and the human trials in Africa that led to a cure for African sleeping sickness. Awesome. Moving on. The first American woman to win a Nobel Prize in the sciences, Gertie Corey's work involves studying the mechanism by which the body processes food, the Corey cycle, leading to treatments for diabetes and other diseases. Awesome. Florence Siebert developed a tuberculin test that is still the standard today. Right here, Helen Brooke Taussig, the founder of pediatric cardiology, discovered the cause of blue babies, and today the Blalock-Taussig shunt fixes the condition. Bacteriologist and pediatrician Hattie Alexander developed the first effective treatment for the once fatal influenza meningitis. Pediatric anesthesiologist Virginia Apgar developed a 10-point score to assess the health of newborns. It's administered worldwide at 1 minute to 5 minutes after birth. Now, what's the Apgar score? Biochemist Gertrude Elion received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for her pioneering processes of drug development. Immunosuppressant drug enables organ transplant. Judith Graham Poole identified factor VIII, the clotting factor in human blood plasma, and developed a way to manufacture it, allowing hemophiliacs to live more fully. Wow. Chemist and X-ray crystallographer Rosalind Franklin's work led to greater understanding of DNA, viruses, coal, and graphite. Probably discovered the double structure of helix DNA. Rosalind Yalow received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for her work in developing the radioimmunoassay, a technique that uses radioactive isotopes to measure small amounts of biological substances. Chemist Helen Murray Free developed a number of self-testing symptoms for diabetes, including Clinistix and the dip and read test. Pioneering African-American ophthalmologist Patricia Bath invented the laser phaco probe, a device that improves on lasers to remove cataract and cataract lenses. Molecular biologist Flossie Wong-Stahl was the first person to clone the HIV virus, a major research advancement in the treatment of AIDS, guys. And this is just a short list of all the contributions women have made in medicine and technology as a whole. We're not going to sit here and act like this is all of it, but I still think it's very cool. And so, breaking all of that down, I want to take a look, at the initial kind of comings of medicine, guys, and where kind of we are at as a society. In our Enlightenment Hour, slave women back in the day really did bring a lot of herbal medicine and traditional medicine into our country. And they played a huge role into where women are even today and our healthcare today, right? So this is a little bit of a history on some old medicine. However, this is not, by any means, I'm not trying to invoke anything sensitive. So if, by any means, this is a sensitive topic to you, please feel free to tune out. But I think this is hopefully worth everybody's time, right? And so that's what we're here for. And I want to make sure that we honor everybody properly. And, considering America was built on the backs of people, these are part of the people that were. And this is, what I wanted to focus on for sure. So let's dive on in. And I am looking for one specific thing real quick. Excellent. So before I jump on in, it was interesting because this is how it was, really came about, because plantation healers ended up becoming pharmacy graduates, right? Like their white counterparts, African-American women also served as informal healers during the early days of our nation. Enslaved African-Americans brought their knowledge of herbal medicine with them, and sometimes even medicinal plant seeds with them to America. As they familiarized themselves with their new land and its inhabitants, they added to the knowledge and used it to heal people, both enslaved and free. Remedies used by slaves were passed down orally from one generation to the next. However, many in society disapproved of African culture or religious practices that accompanied herbal medicine or treatment. Also, there was wariness about owning slaves with the real knowledge to heal or poison their masters. This fear prompted the enactment of several ethnicity-based laws to restrict the practice of administering medicine. How crazy, right? So, post-Civil War America presented African Americans with opportunities. As we talked about a little bit earlier, Julia Pearl Hughes Coleman Robinson was the first African American woman to own and operate a pharmacy in Philadelphia and possibly in America. She opened Hughes Pharmacy in 1899, graduated from Howard University with her pharmaceutical degree in 1897, and ran the hospital pharmacy at Frederick Douglass Hospital. In 1908, Anna Louise James made history as the first African-American woman to graduate from the Brooklyn College of Pharmacy and the first to become a licensed pharmacist in Connecticut. She later worked in her brother-in-law's pharmacy and took it over after he went to fight in World War I, and she became the sole owner in 1922 and worked until she retired in 1967. So let's talk a little bit about slave medicine and the practice of Western African medicinal plants. So West African slaves brought not only herbal knowledge with them across the Atlantic, they also imported the actual seeds. Some wore necklaces of wild licorice seeds as a protective amulet. Captains of slaving vessels used native roots to treat fevers that decimated their human cargo. The ship's hellish holds were lined with straw that held the seeds of African grasses and other plants that may have took root in New World soil. Moreover, since the West African climate is similar to the climate of the Mid-Atlantic region, slaves may have found counterparts to their own plant species. Certainly, the herb lore of captive Africans was expanded by contact with Indian tribes as well as the interactions with Europeans. French missionaries in the 17th century, for example, noted the use of boneset, Eupatorium perfoliatum, in the Iroquois. In the 18th century, both Europeans and their African slaves used it, and by the 19th century, the medical establishment was regularly using it for prescribing fevers. Although the exchange of plant knowledge was cross-cultural, there were distinct differences in the way this knowledge was preserved and applied. Slave remedies were transmitted orally from generation to generation, whereas white domestic healers like Lucy tended to write down cures along with recipes for preserves and meat pies in recipe books. Their healing recipes were often complex and required considerable amounts of time to prepare. A recipe for dysentery, for example, demanded a boiling teacup of logwood chips in a pint of sweet milk. Then boil another 10 minutes with sugar, and finally burning 4 tablespoons of brandy in a plate, then stirring that into the mixture. Slave remedies tended to be simpler than white medicines. Teas or poultices were made with 1 or 2 plants. Scholar Sarah Mitchell Cotton speculates that slaves had less time to gather ingredients and less time to prepare complex mixtures. Other researchers suggest that simplicity may have been a result of a more sophisticated understanding of the properties of each plant. Who's going to know? So religion and healing. Unlike the science-based of medicine today, 18th century medicine had a religious component for both black and white healers. As Eileen Malone Brown observes in her essay, Healthcare During Lucy's Lifetime, some Europeans saw healing plants as a gift from God, and many practitioners resorted to prayer as well as herbs. African healers also felt a sacred connection to the plants they found in the woods, and they used elements from African religious rituals when they prepared medicines. Europeans, however, dismissed African spirituality as superstition and an indication of a childlike mentality. Lucy may or may not have exchanged remedies with slave root doctors and midwives, but as a devout Christian, she certainly would have disapproved of slave conjurers who, in the tradition of their forebears in Africa, cast spells along with plants and animal parts, used trickery and intimidation to treat illnesses of both body and soul. Lucy was a Methodist, and Methodists were known for evangelizing amid slave communities. So it's probable that many of Lucy's slaves, perhaps without altogether abandoning ancestral religious beliefs, adopted their owner's creed. Converted slaves likely would have gained not only her favor, but also inspiration from biblical stories like Exodus that hold the promise of triumph over oppression. So let's talk about some slave remedies and recipes. Slaves used many of the plants used by the community of their white owners, such as snake root, mayapple, red pepper, boneset, pine needles, comfrey, and red oak bark, to name a few. Slave healers understood the various preparations of pokeweed and how to avoid its dangers while taking advantage of its curative properties. Sassafras root tea was a popular blood cleanser believed to search the blood for what was wrong with it and to go work on it. Jimson weed was known for rheumatism, chestnut leaf for asthma, mint and cow manure tea for fur consumption. Slave midwives would have known and used herbs for female complaints and to ease childbirth. Slaves preferred their own doctors to white doctors and their heroic purging of bloodletting. For an enlightening look at what it meant to be sick when you didn't own your own body, see historian Todd L. Sabat's online essay about slave health and medicine, If You Got Sick and Were Black. Slave health and plantation productivity. So the health of a planter's workforce was critical to economic success. All slave illnesses had to be reported to a farm's overseer or owner under the pain of punishment. The responsibility for the health of all slaves often fell to the mistress of the plantation. In 1781, a year after Lucy married her second husband, John Marks, a French nobleman, William Bird's large plantation on the James River, and remarked that Miss Bird took great care of her Negroes, makes them happy as their situation will permit, and serves them herself in times of goodness. He goes on to say, she has even made some interesting discoveries on the disorders to them and discovered a very salutary method of treating a sort of putrid fever which carries them off commonly in a few days, and against which the physicians of the country have exerted themselves without avail. Like Miss Bird, Lucy would have spent considerable time attending to her slaves' health, especially since after the death of her second husband. She was not only the mistress for her plantation, she was the master as well. Presumably, like her slave-owning neighbor, Thomas Jefferson, she would have followed common health practices like providing warm clothing in the winter and restricting heavy labor for pregnant women at the end of their terms. Still, despite her investment in the health of her slaves, they would have suffered from complaints ranging from worms and skin ulcers to respiratory diseases and influenzas. Moreover, any complaint could become a point of conflict. It was not simply a question of slaves preferring their own doctors and often being reluctant to report illness to an overseer or owner. There was the more complicated question of malingering. Slaves often complained of sickness to avoid work, a strategy that encouraged the perception of slaves as lazy and deceitful. However, in West African mythology, the trickster Ishu was a hero. On American shores, he wore the guise of Burr Rabbit, the admirable scoundrel of Uncle Remus stories. Like her fellow slave-owning planters, Lucy would have had to determine whether a slave was actually ill or faking illness. Given that she was a disciplinarian with her own children, we can suppose she was strict with her servants. As she and her peers euphemistically referred to their slaves. Nonetheless, a slave's claim of sickness would have put her on the horns of a dilemma. To ignore real illness might result in a prolonged, more serious illness or even death, and on the other hand, to allow a slave to take a bed reduced her labor force. In either case, farm profits would suffer, and some plantations, like George Washington's Mount Vernon, which had over 300 slaves, had separate quarters for sick slaves. We do not know if Lucy, who owned 47 slaves at the time, had a sick house at Locust Hill, and no doubt she was assisted in her doctoring by slave nurses who, under supervision, would have administered medicines prepared gruels, and clean patients and their bedcloths of blood, vomit, and excrement. We do know that Lucy paid a neighbor, Mrs. Villa, to wait on Frankie, a pregnant female slave. Lucy may have also owned a slave doctress or granny who would have combined her herbal knowledge with midwifery skills. Slave midwives were more valuable and earned their owners and perhaps themselves money by safely delivering slave babies, and in some cases, white babies as well. So if healing skills were an advantage to both slave and owner, they also posed a threat. Slaves who knew their plants had easy access to poison. They knew which herbs could abort pregnancies, which could sicken, and which could cause sudden death. In Virginia, in the decade between 1791 and 1809, were marked by a series of slave uprisings, the most notable of the Gabriel Plot, in which over 1,000 slaves attacked the city of Richmond. In 1831, Nat Turner led to his famous slave rebellion in Virginia's Tidewater. Virginia state records show that between 1780 and 1864, 58 slaves were convicted of poisoning or attempted poisoning. No matter how much white slave owners relied on and trusted slave healers, they also feared them. This fear prompted the enactment of laws. As early as 1748, the colony of Virginia forbade any Negro or any other slave to administer any medicine whatsoever under the pain of death without the benefit of the clergy. An exception was made for slaves treating other slaves or her own owner's family, providing the owner gave permission. In 1792, the law was softened to allow acquittal if the slave practitioner's herbs and the patient happened to die. And it had been shown that there had been no ill intent and bad consequence. Thus, if a doctoress administered the preparation and something happened bad, the angry owner could have the slave hanged. As an earlier historian observed, with stringent laws and with fear of poisoning constantly in the public mind, it's surprising that any of the Negroes drew attention to the risky business of prescribing for the sick. In fact, the laws were no different. Slave medicine flourished on all plantations. While collecting wild herbs and roots, slave doctors, male and female, escaped the boundaries of their working life and perhaps experienced a fleeting taste of physical freedom. Certainly a belief in the sacredness of healing plants allowed them to connect with an authority higher than their owners, be it animistic African deities or a single Christian God. In treating fellow slaves, they became an instrument of divine power. They, not their owner, controlled the patient's body, and at its core, slave healing was an empowerment for both the healer and the patient. Pretty cool stuff, for sure. And it takes us all way back, right? And, history is very, very interesting, right? And we look at where history takes us, where history has gotten us, medicine to where we are today. Crazy how it's just becomes obviously, systematically, developed and industrialized over a large amount of time. Females, when it comes to pharmacy specifically, have found a way to rise. And we just want to give that salute, That is the main core of, really what's important. So I want to show you guys here a little bit of a clip. And this was from the past in our Herbal Wellness Corner, brought to you by Horse Cannabis Company. Pretty cool clip. Before I highlight, an awesome contributor, I want to show you guys this, because look at where I want to show you guys where the world was at not too long ago, and let's think about where we are at right now, right? So, jumping on in. Bada boom, bada bing.
Dr. Chanda Messias, owner of the National Holistic Healing Center in Washington, D.C., minority women may be the next pioneering leaders and entrepreneurs in the marijuana industry.
The marijuana industry is so appealing for women because we're nurturers. We're just innately, that's the way it is. We love our families, we love our children, we want what's best for them. I thought, well, if we had medication like a cannabis in the oral care formulation, wouldn't it make sense for the treatment of cancer and other illnesses?
Dr. Macias is a pioneer and leader in the marijuana industry. In 2015, Macias was one of 5 people in Washington, D.C., awarded licenses to own and operate a dispensary. And she is one of only 2 black women to own a dispensary in the nation. It wasn't an easy road. She couldn't find mentors and had to navigate her own path.
You don't have any access. I'm the access to other women. I am the access to other minorities. I remember when I was first starting out and I had no experience in this field because it's so new. There's no training for this. There's no formal education.
According to the Marijuana Business Daily, at one point, women held 36% of executive level roles in the cannabis industry. But as the market matures, women appear to be losing ground. Now it's down to 27%, still 5 points higher than the 22% average.
We should not be happy about the attrition rate of women leaving this industry. And they face different barriers.
Still, Dr. Macias is optimistic about the future of women in cannabis because it's a young, growing business. 29 states and the District of Columbia have approved medical marijuana. Only 8 states and D.C. allow recreational usage. Attorney General Jeff Sessions recently announced the federal government will prosecute anyone in possession of and/or selling marijuana in the states where it has been legalized. African Americans are 4 times more likely than whites to be incarcerated for drugs. This is particularly difficult for Macias, being a mother of 4.
I have seen in the past where my older children have disclosed that your mother is a professional in the medical marijuana industry and disperses medicine, and they have been very brutal in calling me names like a drug dealer, unfit parent. And what I say is that I love my children.
Macias says the science proves the healing properties of cannabis. Today, she's the market leader for D.C., Ohio, and Maryland for Women Grow, the first professional network that connects and empowers women in the cannabis industry. She hosts educational meetings to discuss the benefits.
In order to destigmatize the negative connotation of marijuana, we have to actually educate people on the true benefits of it. People have seen how it's impacted their lives. They have seen the changes it has had in their health care. And despite of the changing laws, they're going to continue to medicate.
All right, Rena, so why are the number of women in this business dropping so precipitously?
It's hard to tell why they're dropping. I think it really has something to do with states. You know, there's a lot of confusion out there. We've seen recent polls that say that more than half of Americans now support the legalization of marijuana. Of course, this is medicinal marijuana we're talking about. So I think the amount of confusion that's out there between state and federal and where we fall as a country really on medicinal marijuana is confusing to many women. So perhaps they're tepid to enter that space.
You know, women got in on the ground floor. I was surprised at that. It's a new industry. Frankly, I'm much more...
It also requires a lot of access to capital to get those licenses, which are licenses to print money.
And Bonnie,
you get one of those and you're rich for life.
I think keeping such a business going for capital reasons is just the reason, is really the paramount reason. But I tell you, I'm more worried about what Sessions is doing to drive back the industry to people of every sex and race than I am about this, because it's such a new industry. I think we still have time.
Do you think that there should be lower barriers for women and women of color, particularly, to get into this industry because it is so new?
Absolutely. What we should be doing is encouraging more women into leadership positions in all sorts of businesses, including the marijuana industry.
But again, we're talking about access to capital here. You can't get a license unless you're rich. And then when you get it, you get even richer. So that, you know, access to capital is unfortunately the way for many women and brown-skinned women to get into industries, and that's not happening so far. That's it for this edition. Please follow.
So an interesting little segment right there from PBS. Literally, back in 2018, guys, we're in 2024. So that's 6 years ago. Again, I think it's just a very interesting parallel between the pharmacy industry and the cannabis industry, seeing as, pharmacy has really toppled those scales in terms of women, and their involvement. And I'm really kind of, optimistic about the way that the cannabis industry is going to continue to go, because when you really look at women in the cannabis industry, obviously, as we just looked at pretty much in the last 3 segments, women in medicine, women have obviously continued to contribute in so many different ways that are just awesome and special. And so, where we really get to perhaps see the continued advancement of that, I think it's some pretty cool stuff. New Mexico, according to New Mexico data as of October 25th of last year, 2023, women accounted for 29.5% of the state's cannabis business owners. Pretty cool, right? So, I mean, at the very least, you can see that the drive there has been, as of recent in the state of New Mexico, and it's cool stuff. And looking at it as a whole and the history of women in cannabis, literally, I think this was a pretty cool article on LinkedIn discussing it, and we'll get into a couple specifics here, and then we'll also get into great women's group I do want to highlight here locally. However, the history of women in cannabis has a long and complicated history, especially regarding its use by women. From ancient times to the present day, there have been numerous accounts of female healers using cannabis for medicinal purposes. Ancient Mesopotamian women were among the first to create herbal beverages with saffron, mint, and hemp seeds to make childbirth and menstruation more bearable. Women also played a vital role in the 20th century during the prohibition of cannabis in the United States. It was largely women who organized, protested, and supported those affected by unjust laws and practices. For example, anthropologist Margaret Mead even testified before Congress in favor of the legalization of cannabis October 27, 1969. And I think, I definitely want to talk a little bit about Margaret Mead here. Her congressional testimony, pretty cool script. The competitive problems in the drug industry, hearings before the Subcommittee on Monopoly, Select Committee on Small Business of the United States Senate. Very cool. Present status of the competition in the pharmaceutical industry, aka psychotropic drugs. Margaret Mead went out and testified long before and in the middle of prohibition, right? Probably towards the earlier side. She was called to testify on various issues, especially in her later years, and she was asked to address topics related to areas such as nutrition, environment, medicine, and science. And in these hearings on the drug industry in October 1969, Mead addressed a variety of concerns, including developing therapeutic drugs to deal with the stress of modern life and using technology to prevent the occurrence of adverse drug interactions. However, her testimony is most remembered for her comments in favor of cannabis. And that's, pretty awesome there, because she did a whole heck of a lot, right? Mead, widely regarded as a vocal commentator on contemporary American life. She literally spoke on a range of subjects, from the generation gap, aging, the nuclear family, education, race, poverty, women's rights, and sexual behavior, in addition to cannabis, right? So in terms of, somebody who has really, went out there, especially in the early history, got to absolutely, give Margaret Mead a shout out. Very, very influential figure there. Many women nowadays are absolutely very, contributing in the industry, and we've seen it completely take off, but it comes from these selective small efforts that have really put us in great places. In terms of healthcare, it's awesome because there is notable female scientists that is basically responsible for almost the discovery of the endocannabinoid system as we know it. The most famous is Alan Howlett, a biochemical neuropharmacologist who made the revolutionary discovery in 1988 by researching the CB1 cannabinoid receptor in the endocannabinoid system. Her research revealed that cannabinoids found in the plant interact with receptors within our brain, which is a breakthrough that paved the way for further exploration into medical cannabis use. And, Alan Howlett, that's pretty awesome, right? Still alive today. Working at the Wake Forest University School of Medicine. Talk about an OG right there. How about that? Definitely got to give her a testimony. Noted for her discovery of the CB1 receptor for cannabinoid agonists, development of the radioligand binding assay for the cannabinoid receptors that led to their identification, and the development of antibodies that have been made available to researchers worldwide. super cool. Without the CB1 receptor, I would have nothing to talk about. This lady, this doctor, absolutely rocked it. So great work by Alan Howlett. So last women in history that I'm going to shout out right now before we get out to shouting out a group, Essie DeBonet, guys. And if you guys go and check out my live stream, I did a really, really long, thorough fleshing and unpacking of the New Mexico medical cannabis industry on how New Mexico became the 12th state in the country to legalize medical cannabis due to the efforts of the Lynn and Aaron Compassionate Use Act, where Essie DeBonet was, the first medical cannabis patient in our state, advocating heavily for cannabis against big time, state pushback, big time pharma lobbying. She was an HIV/AIDS sufferer, and she did, she really put the face to the need for medicine, right? And for medical cannabis. And she is the reason that we have, cannabis in our state today. So shout out to Essie DeBonet. And as we do shout her out today, I do implore you to please scan this QR code, jump on to KirpleMagazine.com, vote for High Horse, Pharmtrue in the Essie Awards, and please vote for myself for the Essie Award. Guys, we really implore that. Voting goes till the 29th. Cool stuff, and we're very excited. So again, myself for the Essie Award, myself for Best Cannabis Advocate, Pharmtrue, my company, for Best Advocacy Group. And then we got High Horse Cannabis Company, Best Dispensary in the Southeast and Southwest quadrant of the state, Best Customer Service, Best Wholesale Macro Producer, Best Flower overall. Let's take them all home. Toss in those votes. Shop High Horse, vote Essie's. Please, please, please. And for another group that I definitely want to shout out, guys, the Dope Moms. You know who you are. Guys, this is a local group that is out there for women, by women. And I said that backwards, but a very important local group to our community because they have resources literally for moms all around here, because not only do women fight the stigmas of cannabis when it comes to pregnancy, childbirth, childcare, so on and so forth, there's strength in numbers, right? And you got to go sometimes find your tribe. And so if you are a woman who's out there trying to figure it out, feeling alone, anything like that, I highly implore you to check out Dope Mom Southwest. They have a women's only Facebook group, obviously all kinds of events. Some of them are business owners themselves. You can absolutely go support their businesses. Very, very cool stuff. And we want to give them the recognition that they deserve, because that is a very cool example of a beehive network of people in a community that is willing to take care of each other and protect each other regardless of anything else out there. And that's a very, very cool testament to the strength of the collective voice. So Dope Mom Southwest, very, very awesome. Shouting them out today. Guys, let's jump on to Community Spotlight. We have diabetes education group this Thursday, March 14th, with Dr. Katie Lee, Doctor of Dental Surgery, brought to you by the Southern New Mexico Diabetes Outreach over at Natural Grocers from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. She's going to be giving an oral health and diabetic friendly cooking demo. So shout out to that. A lot of great women, in healthcare, and this is an awesome, woman-led community event happening this Thursday, 10 o'clock a.m. Natural Grocers, highly recommend. Go check that out if you can. Go support. And lastly, guys, in our Men's Health Minute, brought to you by Vado Speedway Park. Guys, racing season is kicking back up, and that's exciting, right? So this weekend, it's on like Donkey Kong, the Winter Meltdown at Vado Speedway Park. Some awesome modified racing. We are back. It's going to be a freaking blast. Come find me out there Friday, Saturday. Not just me, though. Go watch those sweet race cars, right? Anyways, in our Men's Health Minute, I want to talk about a very cool, interesting, thought-provoking article where we look at men and boys' voice in advancing women's agency and where we stand in new direction. So, this is very interesting because obviously There is gender roles here that need to be played for the advancement, and gender norms that perhaps have obviously caused us to where we are today. Anyways, so let's talk about it. We'll go through this a little bit. What are gender norms and why do they matter? So gender norms are broadly understood by members of a population and are considered those qualities of femaleness and maleness that develop as a result of socialization rather than biological predisposition. Distinct norms of behaviors for men and women are socially constructed, which means that gender is created through patterns of social interactions, not determined biologically, according to Connell in 1987. These norms of behavior for men and women are particularly powerful because deviations can be punished through social exclusion, ostracism, or sometimes violence. For a woman who breaks restrictive norms of femininity, for example, social or physical punishment can include ridicule by peers, expulsion from her home, or violence. For example, one Tanzanian woman participating in a focus group on violence against women described common punishment for not obeying their husband. It was very common. If you refuse his orders, you will be beaten. When he denies to start a business and you did it anyways, you will be beaten. These consequences serve to limit women's agency. In most gender unequal societies, the negative consequences are so great that women have little room to deviate from the societal norms and make choices for themselves without serious repercussions. Men's actions and behaviors are subject to norms of masculinity in the same way that women are subject to norms of femininity. Examinations of gender norms often focus on the limitations placed on women's agency, but men are also limited to the behaviors and practices that are deemed socially acceptable. Examination of men's gender norms have looked at a society's constructed hegemonic masculinity, defined by R.W. Connell's seminal book, Masculinities, as the form of masculinity that is recognized as the most dominant in society's pattern of gender relations. The hegemonic form of masculinity is often characterized by being aggressive, risk-taking, virile, unemotional, and dominant over women. Men's social position depends in part on their ability to outwardly conform to the standards of this type of masculinity, but this hegemonic form of masculinity is an idealized version that few men can realistically achieve. As Cannell wrote, the number of men rigorously practicing the hegemonic pattern in its entirety may be quite small, yet the majority of men gain from hegemony, since they benefit from the patriarchal dividend. The advantage men in general gain from the overall subordination of women. Hegemonic masculinity therefore permeates throughout the majority of males in society, even though individual males may not be performing masculine ideal. Importantly, men complicit in the practice of hegemonic masculinity do not necessarily actively support the subordination of women. However, the entire patriarchal and social power structure gives men power and status over women. So most men are incentivized to not fight against it. The influence of this system of power has on almost all males in a society is extremely important to the resulting behaviors of men. As men weigh their decisions consciously or subconsciously, their position in the power structure and desire to maintain position or advance will typically play a role in how they view and behave in social situations. The social consequences for men not adhering to societal gender norms are increasingly recognized as influential in men's behaviors. While men's greater decision-making power does not typically give men more agency than women, their decisions are constrained by pressures to be considered masculine. In some settings, men's decision to use contraceptives is constrained by the need to conform to the local norms of masculinity. One Tanzanian woman interviewed for the WDR 2012 qualitative study reported, "You cannot tell men to use birth control. They want children. The more they have, the more manly they appear to be." Likewise, in certain cultures, a man's decision to take on a prominent caregiving role with his family's children may result in a loss of social status. Although men may have greater decision-making power than women, their decisions are still constrained by the negative social consequences of certain decisions that deviate from hegemonic masculinity. In this way, men's decisions are linked to their projection of a masculine identity for their community and peers. One of the most common roles for men across cultures is to be the provider and protector of the family. Thus, men who are able to support their families are fulfilling a primary cultural duty for men in projecting their masculinity to the community. Men who are unable to provide for their family may find alternative methods to display their masculinity. These men sometimes use their behavior, such as sexual activity, capacity for drinking, or shows of force to demonstrate their masculinity for their peers. Men are often culturally obligated to project a masculine image, since the consequences for individual men who are perceived as non-masculine or feminine can be great, from social ostracism to death by violence. Notably, although men as a group typically hold greater power than women, this does not imply that all men are powerful. In fact, poor men and minority men are often marginalized and left out of the traditional power structure. They may still have more power or authority than the women in their lives, but their power in society is limited. For example, many men across settings in the WDR 2012 qualitative study reported having insufficient power and freedom to make strategic decisions that could improve the lives and the lives of their family. Men can sometimes find this perceived lack of power frustrating and adopt certain behaviors, for example, violence or sexual behavior, that gives them a sense of power over others. The social dimensions of masculine behavior play out in households across the globe. In many settings, men's higher status affords them greater decision-making power than women. Men's household decision-making power influences an array of health and well-being issues affecting women, men, and children, including sexual health, nutrition, mental health, economic well-being, and healthcare utilization. Men often have economic control over the provision of health resources for the family and sometimes have more decision-making power than women regarding the use of contraceptive methods. Men's behaviors can influence their own health status. For example, because men are socialized to project an invulnerable image, men are less likely to utilize healthcare services that might reveal their vulnerabilities. Norms of masculinity encourage aggression and subordination of women, both factors that can result in violence against partners or children. Men's perpetration of violence against women is enabled by norms of masculinity and prevailing norms of gender equality in most societies. Research on the role of masculinity in partner violence presented evidence on different domains of masculinity and gender norms that influence perpetration of violence. Review showed that various research studies have demonstrated that men who hold more traditional gender role ideologies are more likely to perpetrate violence. Additionally, men's gender role has been identified as a risk factor for perpetrating violence, and gender role strain refers to men's feelings about their ability to conform to the normative ideas about what it means to be a man. Societies with greater gender inequities are likely to teach young men a traditional gender role ideology and increase pressure that men act in traditionally masculine ways. Both of these factors, research shows, increase the likelihood that a man will perpetrate violence against an intimate partner. So how do we unpack all of that? How does it change? Where does it mean in terms of men's role of women's agency? How can men help to, increase gender equality, right? So we're looking at this. Gender norms impose limits to agencies by delimiting appropriate behaviors for men and women. Women's agency is defined in 2012 by the World Development Report as the ability to make effective choices and to transform those choices into desired outcomes. The social structure of our global society typically places more limits on women's agency than men's. The World Development Report identified 5 main outcomes or expressions that characterize women's agency: control over resources, ability to move freely, decision-making over family formation, freedom from risk of violence, and the ability to have a voice in society and influence policy. Now they go ahead and discuss roles in which men play a role in limiting and enabling women's agency, starting, right, how men limit it, which, guys, I think we all imagine how men can limit it. So I'm not even going to, read on even beyond that, because, it kind of makes sense for kind of the traditional mindset there. But let's flip it to the other side, right? So examining male payoffs to women agency and gender equality. So increasing women's agency and empowering women does not need to result in a loss in agency and empowering for men. Research demonstrates that there are costs for men associated with gender inequality and violence perpetration. Additionally, men often benefit from greater gender equality. Societies as a whole, including the men, often benefit from greater economic and political participation by women. Costs of gender inequality and violence against for men. So take a look at this one. At the individual level, men who perpetrate violence against women are more likely to suffer a variety of mental and physical health ailments. In Vietnam, both men and women in a partnership miss days of work when a man abuses his partner. While gender inequalities that give men decision-making power seem beneficial to men, they restrict men's agency by creating strict roles for men and women. In places where gender inequalities are prevalent, men may be resistant of caregiving professions even though they could receive higher pay. Further inequalities establish different norms for men and women, which has resulted in higher burden of disease and higher rates of behavioral risk factors for diseases. Some of these risk factors include men's higher rates of smoking, tobacco, drinking alcohol, and lower rates of health-seeking behaviors, each of which is derived from gender norms associated with gender inequality. Pretty interesting, right? Something we talked about on Men's Health Minute, especially, men's lower rates in health-seeking behaviors. A derivative of that, is men's agency, right? By the man being the only guy that can make the decision in that traditional sense, is opting not to go and, have health-seeking behaviors. And so that shared agency, may actually help you live longer, may actually help you be a little healthier, right? May actually help your household do greater and better things. So where you look at, how can you benefit everybody by figuring it all out? Increasing women's agency does not decrease men's agency and actually can contribute to increased economic and psychological well-being of household members. The images data has shown that men who are in greater equitable relationships are more likely to be happy and satisfied in their relationships, and that women who report that their male partners are more involved in caregiving and support equitable decision-making in the household are happier with their partners, including sexually happier. In fact, in most countries, men reported greater sexual satisfaction if they had gender equitable beliefs and if they reported having open communication with their partner. Additionally, men who participate actively as fathers are more likely to have better physical and mental health. In a multi-country qualitative study, men who had taken on greater caregiving roles reported benefits to their friendships, relationships with their children, and improved relationship to their spouse. The household earning potential is also increased when women are allowed to work and have the opportunity to earn an income. This can increase opportunities for all members of the household, including men. So, what's important, breaking down the inequalities and increasing women agencies can improve the lives of both men and women. And so this thing goes on into studies all over the world for, many, many more pages here. And I'm going to just share for anybody interested the article here because this one I thought it was a pretty peculiar and interesting one in our Men's Health Minute. So, men, we do play a role in increasing the agency of women. I hope, today's episode helped a little bit in perhaps women's agency some way, somehow, whether it's today or in 10 years, it's going to be on the internet. No one's ever going to take it down. So anyways, hope everybody has a great night. Happy Tuesday, March 12th, and we will see you all tomorrow.